Thanks, Dracula. Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody, and happy first Stoogecast to everyone out there listening, whether that's live or whether you're listening to it downloaded later. I want to thank you very much for taking the time out to spend a little over an hour with me. My name is Corey Udler, and I will be your host on this knuckle-headed adventure, I guess we can say, called the Stoogecast. And now just a little bit of background before we get to our very, very special first guest on the Stoogecast, Saxon Emil Sitka. Of course, the son of the fourth Stooge, Amel Sitka, who everybody knows and loves. Of course, Stooge fans know Amel's work with Curly and Shemp and all the way through the Joe Besser shorts and the feature films and into the color cartoons. And, of course, Emil Sitka was tagged to be Larry's replacement once Larry had a stroke. Mo actually asked Emil to take Larry's place, and Larry gave his full blessing to Emil and said that if anybody was going to take his place, he would want it to be Emil Sitka. Of course, Mo's health deteriorated a little bit, and a few things fell apart, and it never came to pass. Of course, there are some pictures online of Emil Sitka as Harry, and we will talk to Saxon all about that. We're going to delve into a lot of different things with Saxon, and I guarantee you guys are going to absolutely love the interview with Saxon Emil Sitka, the son of Emil Sitka. And very, very honored to have Saxon as our first guest here on the Stoogecast. Now, you're probably wondering, where does the idea for a Stoogecast come from? And who are you? And why are you doing this? And to make a long story short, I have been a Stooges fan as long as I can remember. I remember rushing home as fast as I could from Sunday school to watch the Comedy Hour, I believe is what it was called. And it was on WCCO, Channel 4, out of the Twin Cities. And it was an hour, and it was usually 2 Stooge shorts and a Little Rascals short. I was never interested in the Little Rascals, but man, I was glued to the TV anytime the boys were on. And that love affair, for lack of a better term, with the Stooges, of course, started way back then and has continued to this day. And, of course, once you get a little bit older, you start to wonder about the men behind the madness. And you start to really look at them through different eyes once you either read Mo Howard's book or you start to do a little studying of their years with Ted Healy. And once you get to know, about the tragedy that was Curly Howard's stroke and Shemp Howard's heart attack that cut his life very short, once you really start to get a sense of who these men were, you gain a much larger appreciation for their shorts and their comedy and their style and their place in the history of not just comedy but film and pop culture. So over the years, of course, the Stooges have, for me, been the one consistent, no matter what I'm going through, no matter what kind of day I'm having, no matter what is going on around me, I can always put on the Stooges and always feel good. And that's always been a constant for me. And I've been doing the podcast game for probably 4 or 5 years with Fearcast and on my own. Did a little show called ASTRO RADIO Z for quite a while. It was kind of a horror-themed show. We would interview horror directors and actors and et cetera, et cetera. And my daughter was born in May of last year, and at that time I just completely took a break from everything. I'm also a writer-director of horror films, and I took a break from that and took a break from the podcast game, and during that time I realized that there was no podcast or any sort of radio show or anything dedicated to the Three Stooges, and I just thought that was an absolute crime. And so I just kind of started to put a few wheels in motion to do the Stoogecast. And it's taken a while to get things going, to track a few people down, to have as guests, of course, Saxon Emil Sitka. Our first guest has been so gracious and patient and kind to do the show and hang in there. Of course, it's our first episode, and people probably wondering, who is this schmuck who's trying to do this show about the Three Stooges? Who is he and what does he want? Well, all he wants to do is talk to those who study the Stooges, were around the Stooges, knew the Stooges, and can give a really good story and paint a nice picture and a great perspective on everybody's favorite funny men. Of course, my favorite funny men. And that's really all this was. I just knew that there were interviews that needed to be done, stories that had not been told and had not been preserved anywhere. So that's kind of the point of the show. Of course, a major thing about the show is it's very selfish for me, because I just want to ask these questions. I just want to talk to everybody involved with the Stooges, talk to other fanatics, and talk to family and hopefully some co-stars and things, and just get a good perspective on all things Three Stooges, and that is exactly what the Stoogecast is. It's just meant to be a celebration of all things Three Stooges, and it's meant to talk to the people who know the Stooges the best, whether that's through research or through family or through actually being around the Stooges. And so really that's all the Stoogecast is meant to be, a pure celebration of the Three Stooges. And I promise that every month I will bring you another interesting guest, any sort of news on the Three Stooges, any new releases, etc. I will deliver all that for you right here. And of course, I will give plugs where plugs are needed for great places, great resources for the Stooges. Of course, our guest on the show here in just a moment is Saxon Amel Sitka. And of course, you can read all about Amel Sitka's life and career at amelsitka.com. Also reach it through thefourthstooge.com. Visit the Stoogeum. Of course, Gary Lassen doing a tremendously phenomenal, amazing job out there with the Stoogeum. So give the Stoogeum a look. And, of course, the Three Stooges fan club run by Gary, and the Three Stooges Journal, which comes out 4 times a year. And that's all the latest Stooge news and some fantastic pictures and articles and retrospectives and things. And Jim Pauley has compiled a book. It took him over a decade to do it, Three Stooges Hollywood Filming Locations. If you get a chance, check that one out. A beautiful book, great coffee table book on all of the different locations from the Columbia Ranch all the way to the famous Ache in Every Steak Stairs. Everything is in Jim's book. It is very thorough. It's a very beautiful book. So if you get a chance, check out Jim Pauley's book, Three Stooges Hollywood Filming Locations. And in just a second here, we're going to talk to Saxon Emil Sitka about his father, Emil Sitka, and all of his years with the Stooges, even beyond life with the Stooges. Some great stories, of course, from Saxon about his father, about the Stooges. So we will turn on our Stoogetron 5000, and we will get Saxon on the phone, and we'll have that right after this.
Bo, we got it.
You got what?
We found a way to put Simonized car wax and Simonized car cleaner all in one push-button can.
And just how does it work, Professor Nitwit?
Come on, we'll show you.
Come on, we'll show you.
Come on,
Now look, it squirts on. You push the button. See?
And then what?
You spread it around and let it dry.
And it's really Simonized, is it?
Watch this.
Sure, it's Simonized. Look at that shine.
We'll be famous. We'll make a fortune. We'll call it Instant Simonized.
Instant Simonized, you lame brains. You can already buy Instant Simonized everywhere.
Instant Simonized? They thought of it too?
Simonized thinks of everything. Try Instant Simonized, another easy new way to brighten your day from Simonized Company.
Our very special guest, our first episode of the Stoogecast, is the son of the fourth Stooge, so romantically called the fourth Stooge, Saxon Emil Sitka, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to connect with us again on this one. It's our second attempt.
Well, thank you very much, Corey. It's good to be back with you.
And so we might as well dig right in at the beginning. With your father, of course, Emil Sitka as the fourth Stooge, as he's come to be known, and your father worked with all incarnations of the Three Stooges, all the way back to Curly.
Well, that's true, and now, not everybody knows my father as the fourth Stooge. Let me clarify that. It's a kind of a nickname that has evolved probably more since I got involved in his legacy and after his passing. He never really used that expression himself, the fourth Stooge, but I do like it, and I know it's something that has been used as a byline for a number of articles that were about him, and other people have referred to him as that, including even Mo Feinberg, Larry's brother, in his book, Larry the Stooge in the Middle. He called my father the fourth Stooge. So that is a kind of a title that's been conferred on him, although it wasn't something he himself embraced much himself. So I got to clarify that. But in any case, just for the fans that may not be familiar with my father's career, let me just say that he began working with the Three Stooges very early, 1946, early in his own career. Started with Curly in Half-Wit's Holiday, and then he appeared in probably 30-something shorts with Shemp, and then about 5 or 6 shorts with Joe Besser. And then he stuck around, and after Joe Besser and the Stooges closed down at Columbia Studios, he was in about 3 or 4 of those feature films with Curly Joe DeRita. And then he was also in their series of cartoons. So he worked with the Three Stooges for over a course of 20-something years. He worked with all the 4 different sets of Stooges, in other words, Larry, Moe, and Curly, Larry, Moe, and Shemp, Larry, Moe, and Joe Besser, and then Larry, Moe, and Curly Joe, all 4 different sets of Stooges. So that was one of the unique things about his Stooge career. He also actually worked with all 3 replacement Stooges, meaning Shemp and Joe Besser and Joe DeRita, prior to them becoming Stooges. So he worked with them when they had their solo careers earlier on. And then later on, he also had an unusual distinction in terms of his Stooge career when in the 70s, early 70s, when Larry Fine had a stroke that disabled him and made him retire. And so Mo wanted to carry on with the act, and he asked my dad, Emil Sitka, to replace Larry in the lineup and actually become a Stooge. And unfortunately, Mo's health didn't hold out long enough for them to actually make a film, but it was actually a great honor, my father felt, in terms of his Stooge career, to be asked to actually join the team of the Three Stooges. So there in a nutshell is my father's career with the Three Stooges, for those fans out there that may not be familiar with what he did with them. Some Stooge fans know my father's career probably better than I do, but there are also some that aren't that familiar with the supporting characters, so I just wanted to clarify that and explain kind of what his involvement was. He was in a lot of different shorts with those guys.
Hold hands, you lovebird.
The Stooge fans that are educated on your father's career, and of course the entire career of the Three Stooges, going all the way up to when Larry had his debilitating stroke, and your father was asked to join the group at that point. What were the plans at that point? After Larry had the stroke, what was kind of in the works with Mo and Curly Joe, and then your dad coming in as Larry's replacement?
Well, I don't think that it was the tail end of the Stooges' career for sure, and I know Mo was aware of that. He knew his health was failing and that he wasn't going to be able to carry on too much longer. Maybe that's one of the reasons he wanted to push these projects through. But there were 2 of them. One of them was 1970, and it would have involved going to the Philippines, and so that was got to be too much of a project for them to be able to accommodate. Then there was another project in 1975, and this actually materialized just after Larry passed away in the Woodland Hills motion picture home over there, and it would have involved just going to Palm Springs, and it would have been my father, Mo, and Curly Joe, and they would have been playing just a bit part in a fairly small part in a movie called I think it was called The Jet Set at the time, finally came out as The Blazing Stewardesses. So there was this one film project that got very, very close to happening, unfortunately, Mo, like I said before, his health failed before they ever got out there to Palm Springs to shoot the movie. And oddly enough, the Ritz brothers stepped in and filled in their role. And so that may have been only as far as Mo Howard himself was looking forward to projects. But my father himself was, once he decided he was going to go for this and do this, he started to imagine the Three Stooges trying to come back again. And he had little scripts and bits that he was writing up and little routines that he was practicing that he would be, the third character. He wasn't going to try to replace Larry so much, to do what Larry did, because who could do that? But he was going to come up with a character himself, and it was going to be called Harry, Larry's cousin, and he was going to be real fastidious and real careful and fussy about stuff. And this was supposed to play off of, in contrast to Curly Joe and to Mo. And he wrote up several different short script ideas, including one where Curly Joe was thought to be the first pregnant man in the world, and for some reason there's a mix-up of X-rays, and he's thought to be pregnant, and my father becomes very, very protective and motherly over Curly Joe until they finally find out that it was a mix-up, and then of course you can imagine what happens. But yeah, my father has all kinds of little script and bits and routines that he was planning to develop with Curly Joe and Mo if things had developed. Unfortunately, they didn't.
Now, are these things that still exist? Do you have copies of these ideas that your father had?
Well, I actually have his written notes. I have my father's written notes on file. I've got a vast... when my father passed away, I inherited boxes and boxes and literally a room full of my father's artifacts from his career, going all the way back to 10 years before he even started with the Three Stooges, scripts and playbills and programs. And once he started in the films, he started collecting stills of himself with the Stooges and other actors. And I actually have a full set of every single script my father ever worked with the Three Stooges. I've got all those up in my archives here.
Now, do you have any plans, not to let a cat out of the bag or anything, but do you have any plans of maybe making these available? Because a lot of fans may not know, but you did and of course the website now, of course, is continuing this, but you had the newsletter, the Amel Sitka newsletter for a long time called The Fourth Stooge. Yeah. Now, do you have any plans of making any of your father's writings or any of these scripts available in the future?
Well, I do, and just to cover briefly about the Fourth Stooge newsletter, way back in 1998, my father passed away in 1998, and up until that point in my life, my father's whole acting career and the contact with fans had all been, confined to my father's activities. It was like a hobby he had, and he would constantly be writing to fans and talking. He corresponded with literally thousands of them, but that was his bag. And then when he passed away, I suddenly became the focus of a lot of fans' attention, and it was great. But it wasn't until that point that I finally started to really look into and become an expert on my father's career. And I started hearing from so many fans and started learning so much that I started to share this stuff, what I was learning about my father's career, with the fans that were contacting me. And but I found myself writing the same kind of stories over and over, because it was literally dozens of fans writing to me, and they all kind of had similar questions. So at the same time at work, I happened to take a training class in some program, Microsoft program, to make newsletters. So I put the two ideas together and created a little newsletter that I sent out to probably about 100 fans. It was just copied over at Kinko's. And at the time, I just called it Amel Sitka Update. And I just updated people on what was going on in the aftermath of my father's passing. And but everybody loved it. Everybody that got a copy loved it, and they started sending in little bits and ideas and contributions and pictures and letters that my father had written to them, and encouraged me to go on. So I developed a few more issues every couple of months to stay in touch with all these fans, and the fan base grew to 300 or 400 people. And I finally decided to use a professional printer and adopted a new name called The Fourth Stooge, and actually it became a regular newsletter there in the early 2000s, 2001, 2002, that long ago. And so I was taking information out of my father's diaries, combining it with some of the stills that he'd collected and posters and whatnot, and putting it together with some current information that was going on about the Stooges and whatnot, and putting together this newsletter. And so I did 20 issues way back then, and it gave me a little practice at writing, and it gave me a lot of it got me in developing a sense of research for these articles about my dad's roles. And so actually, in the meantime, and that was a long time ago, and I did about 20 issues, got through about my father's first 50 roles, Hollywood film roles, and but then I had to go back to work, and took a really demanding job, and I stopped doing that newsletter back in about 2004, 2005 or so. And so it was an interesting experience, and what I've done recently now, since I've done so much research for those articles, I've recently gone in and developed a website called amelsitka.com, or you can reach it at thefourthstooge.com. And I've taken pretty much all that information, research, and articles that I did way back then, and I put it online. And so at this very moment, you can go online and read about, say, my father's first 50 or so roles that he did, including many Stooge roles. And you'll see posters and you'll see stills of my father with the Stooges. And if you read the articles that I've written, a lot of them include my father's own diary entries. And that's something that I feel very, very lucky, fortunate to have, which is to say my father, when in 1945, 1946, 47, 48, 49, every day he would make diary entries. And, of course, if he'd worked in the films that day, he would talk about that. And at some point, he goes quite at length in his description of what it was like when he first met the Three Stooges, for instance. So if you go in there and you find my father on my website, find the page for Halfwit's Holiday, you'll be able to read my father's actual first-hand impressions of what it was like meeting the Stooges and working with the Stooges. And this is available online right now. It is my goal, though, to compile that and actually complete the set of Stooge experiences my father had, which is going to be probably something like 50 different productions my father was in with the Stooges, and and to go into detail about each and every one, and to share information, including script information and whatnot, and compile a book. And in fact, that's my project for this year, 2014, to come out with a book. It'll probably be entitled The Fourth Stooge, memoirs and mementos of Three Stooges co-star Emil Sitka. And I will be sharing all that stuff. I do know there's a lot of interest in it. Many times fans, when they find out I have this stuff, they can't believe that such stuff still exists. And I've got it. Letters from Mo, and contracts from my father with the Stooges, and contracts and scripts and call sheets, and all kinds of behind-the-scenes information in details and mementos and artifacts about the Stooges. So, yeah, I do plan to share it, and it's going to be this year sometime. I can't say what month. Probably, hopefully, by September, I suppose.
And that's also a thing, too, with your father, after all of, Mo and Curly Joe and everybody had passed, your father really became the authority because he was there throughout many, many years. And like I said earlier, all the incarnations of the Three Stooges. So your dad really was the flag bearer and was the guy who was there with the Stooges. And I think a lot of fans really looked to your dad for that information.
Well, he did, assume somehow a role of sort of being an ambassador for the Stooges. Of course, he was a lot younger than the Three Stooges, maybe 20 years younger. And so he lived a lot longer, and after they were gone and became legends, and he was still around and able to talk firsthand about working with the Three Stooges. And like you say, he was sought out by a lot of people, fans, not only fans, but also historians and authors. Anybody who was serious about the subject of the Three Stooges would look up my father and seek him out for his firsthand experiences, which he was always glad to participate in. He's quoted often. You'll see him in video retrospectives, and there's tapes of him, radio broadcasts that have been recorded where he was happy to discuss his experiences with the Three Stooges. He was also particularly proud of the fact that he helped out with the effort to get the Three Stooges their star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which is near Hollywood Boulevard in Hollywood. And he helped Gary Owens and the team get that thing together and spoke at the ceremony. And realized that for a lot of fans, he was like one of the few living people who they could speak to and had direct experience with the Three Stooges. So, yeah, he loved it. He corresponded, I said before, with literally thousands of Three Stooges fans, and he got more Christmas cards than anybody else I know because of corresponding. But he loved all that, and he'd take phone calls, and he even had visitors come. People would come out to L.A. from the Midwest or back east, and sort of on pilgrimages, and they would go visit various Stooge sites, and he was always on the list of people to visit when they came out. He even had people in it, Three Stooges fans, 3 of them, in his house the day that he had the stroke, that when he passed away. So he had Three Stooges fans with him till the very end.
Taking a look back, on your father's career, not just with the Stooges, but with everything else, once you inherited all of this information, all these writings, these diary entries and things, were you surprised that you were learning things about your father's career that even you didn't know?
Well, that's for sure. And I'll be honest with you, when I was a little kid, in 1958, I was 4 years old. 58 was the year that the Three Stooges and actually a lot of other material from the backlog of motion pictures was released to television. And so, we got to see the Three Stooges on TV all the time, and you grow up, I grew up anyway, with seeing my father on TV frequently. And it wasn't unusual, it was normal, and I didn't really appreciate how significant that was. But it kind of, I have to admit, sort of gave me a complacency about the significance of it all, kind of didn't really register to me that, this is really cool. My father's on TV with all these stars. It didn't really register, and so I kind of grew up with the feeling that, well, my father's career, films and all that's nice, but it didn't really impress me in any way. And I had my own life and was doing my own things. And it really wasn't until my father passed away that I realized that now I've got to kind of inheriting this legacy. I've got a responsibility to know about this. And so I've, in the last 16 years, I've educated myself. I really pretty much all the details and facts about my father's career that I do know now, I've learned since he passed away. And I kind of feel bad that I didn't look into it more when he was still around, but I just took it all for granted. And but since then, I've just to know how many movies he was actually in, just to realize how many Stooge films he was in, how many other big stars that he worked with. All those were surprises to me as I started, sort of you might say a personal journey of discovery of my father's long film career. So it is taking me these 16 years to the point where I can pretty much tell any title that he was in and what kind of role he was in, and maybe even what era it was in, the film role was in. So I've educated myself, and it's all been a big surprise. So it's like I grew up so close to it, I couldn't see it,
Sure.
The forest and the trees kind of concept was going on for me. And I really, at this point in time, I wish that I'd asked more questions of my dad, because now there's blank spots in questions that arise when I do study his career in detail. And certain issues arise, and certain, like I say, questions come up where if only I could ask him, well, what happened exactly during this episode, or why did this happen? And so he would be a great asset to me now. If he was around now, I'd still have further questions for him, despite the fact I have so much information.
And taking a look way, way back, how did your father first kind of get into acting? Because I know, through some of the things that I've read, of course, from the Fourth Stooge and AmelSitka.com,
right.
That your dad kind of had a rough go of things early on in life.
He did, and of course we're going way back to the early 1900s and whatnot. My father was born in 1914. His parents had come over from Europe, Czechoslovakia, and they didn't speak any English. And although my father's father was an engineer in Europe, he could only get a job in the coal mines out here, coal mines in the steel factories, and so they came out here. And my father was the firstborn, and then they had 4 more children living in Pittsburgh. And unfortunately, this job that my grandfather had cost him his life, black lung disease, and my father lost his father at the age of about 13 or 14. And his mother was unable to take care of the 5 kids and had a nervous breakdown. So suddenly him and his 4 brothers and sisters were all orphans. and as early teenagers, and or 10 and 11 years old. And they all went to live in different foster homes, except for my father. He had been an altar boy, and so he went to live with a Catholic priest named James R. Cox, Father Cox in Pittsburgh, who was the youngest priest to ever have a parish in Pittsburgh at Old St. Patrick's Church. And so my father went to live with the church, and because he lived there, he participated in a lot of the events that they had going on. And one of them was the bingo. And he had a loud voice, which he had kind of gotten from selling newspapers on the street, so he developed a loud voice. And so he would call out the numbers at the bingo games, and because he had a loud voice. Then when it came time to cast the annual Passion Play, which is a play about the last days of Jesus Christ, very solemn performance, and his church would do one every year at Christmas time. And so he would do, or it'd be after Christmas, but he would get elected to be on the cast because he had a loud voice, and they needed a loud voice for a person who would lead this crowd against Jesus Christ. And so he was calling for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, even though he was an altar boy, but he had this loud voice. And so that got him his first role in one of these Passion Plays, and he enjoyed it a lot. And so then the next year came around, he did it again, and the next year did it again, and he started to develop a very serious interest in acting. Of course, he was still a teenager, about 15 years old, 15, 16, but he loved it so much that he took a role in some local summer stock and began his acting career on stage that way. So it's kind of odd to think that this comic actor that we see with the Three Stooges actually started his acting career, in a play about Jesus Christ. So all the way from the solemn life of Christ to this wacky humor of the Three Stooges. But my father always had that sense of humor. I've spoken to people who knew him as a young man, and they said he was always making people laugh, even way back as a young man. So that was part of his nature. Then he pursued acting as on stage in Pittsburgh until he moved out to L.A. in 1936, and continued working on stage. Probably worked at every single little theater in the Hollywood area, including the Pasadena Playhouse, and did that for 10 years, from 1936 to 1945. And at that time, he happened to be working with a woman named Simona Boniface, who wrote a play. And she was familiar with my father's acting work, but she was also working a day job with the Three Stooges herself. And I don't know if that name sounds familiar, but Simona Boniface was a woman who played the matronly matriarch of the family type of person, older woman, and very stately and dignified. And so she had written a play herself. My father was working in that one, and so she mentioned to Jules White about the possibility of talking with my father, and so eventually it did lead to a screen test, and my father was cast in by Jules White into one of his shorts, not starring the Three Stooges, but starring Vera Vague in 1945, and he got his first little role, and then he got another role, and by his seventh role in 1946, he got his first role with the Three Stooges. And, of course, the rest is sort of history.
And that's very interesting, that Simona Boniface was the one who got him the screen test with Jules White, and they would perform together with the Three Stooges all the way through. And one that comes to mind is, of course, the Jerks of All Trades TV pilot.
Yeah, and also another one who done it is one with, that she's in also, I think, for Crying Out Loud. Is another one where she's in it, and you can see my father and her work well together. Whenever you see the two of them in a scene, they do work very well together. Of course, they'd been working very well together on stage, doing these live plays at night, and you actually get more acting experience doing those kind of things because you do the same play, say every 4 nights a week for 5 weeks in a row, and you really develop a rapport with another actor, chemistry, you might say. So him and Simona Boniface, my father and Simona Boniface, certainly worked together well and frequently.
And one of the interesting things that your father did, kind of around, the early part of his life, was he took what I guess, for lack of a better term, is a hobo trip. What can you kind of tell us about the hobo trip that your father took?
Yeah, well, it's interesting to bring that up. It's not really related to the showbiz at all, but it is a fact that my father grew up in those hard times of the Depression, in the church. But when he became 16 years old at the church, he suddenly realized that he was not really going to pursue a career with the church. He had kind of thought that he might become a priest, but he elected not to, and his brother was released from foster care. And so a little while later, when my father was 17, he and my brother, it was desperate times in Pittsburgh, and there was, they were living in a little shanty across the street from the church. My father moved out of the church into a little cardboard house called a shanty across the street, and the two of them were living there, my father and his brother, and they were starving and had no job prospects and didn't know what to do. And so they thought, well, anywhere else has got to be better. So they packed up and took a trip thinking it would be better in New York City. So they took a bus from Pittsburgh to New York City and stayed there for several months, and of course things were not better, and they decided to go back to Pittsburgh. At least they knew some people there after several months. So on their way back to Pittsburgh, they ran out of money and they couldn't even hop on a bus, and so they learned how to hop trains. And they hopped trains en route to Pittsburgh, stayed in Pittsburgh for a while, but ended up in jail because they were broke. They were living on the side of a river, and they were broke, and the authorities were cracking down on these shanty towns. And so they ended up in jail. And as soon as they got out of jail, after a couple of weeks in Pittsburgh, they just headed down to the rail yards, having learned how to hop trains, and they just began hopping a train. And they thought, well, we don't know where to go. Let's at least go to, say, Chicago. They knew where Chicago was. They had heard of it, and they were having a World's Fair there. Everybody heard of Chicago at that time, 1933 World's Fair. And so they ended up going there, and going into the fair, they actually saved a few pennies, begged for a few pennies. And once they'd been through the fair, they realized they really didn't know where they were going, so they continued west and ended up taking trains, hopping trains all the way to the West Coast, and then came down the West Coast, San Francisco and whatnot, looking for jobs basically the whole time, looking for any kind of work and employment to see what opportunities a couple of young men could find. And, of course, with the Depression on, they couldn't find anything. And, they might get a job for a couple of days, but that'd be the best they could do. And the two of them circled around back through the southwest United States and went through St. Louis, and they eventually ended up back in Pittsburgh. It took them about a year for this whole trip. And my father was, 17, 18 years old, and his brother was 2 years younger. And it was a real eye-opening experience. You could say a rite of passage for a young man. I'm sure he came back a man. He may have left a boy and came back a man. A lot of hard times, a lot of starving, a lot of run-ins with the law. Fortunately, the two of them did survive the trip, although it was pretty sketchy. And it was quite an experience, so much so that a couple of years after it happened, this all occurred in 1932-33, a couple of years after that, 1936, he decided to write a detailed story. So he wrote a memoir, and he actually intended it to be published in a local youth magazine, but he wrote a detailed story about 30 pages, typewritten pages long, about his experiences. And I've still got that manuscript, and I'm probably going to combine it with a number of little mementos that he'd collected along the way. He was a pack rat, and he actually collected meal tickets and whatnot, false identification tags and whatnot that he would get when he was on that trip. And he saved them all these years. I've actually got them now, so I was thinking to combine those items with that manuscript and publish that. And it would be interesting on its own. It's a true life testament as to what it was like to be a young teenage hobo on the road during the Great Depression in the United States. It's not much related to the entertainment industry, but it still is an authentic tale, and I figure I'm going to share that one, publish that as well here in the next few months.
And it certainly does give kind of a picture of where your father kind of came from. And how, where he started and his experiences, and then ultimately making it to Hollywood. So it really does paint, quite a vivid picture of everything your father did.
Certainly formed a good portion of his character, and probably contributed in some way to his desire to make people laugh, because so much of his childhood was on the sad side, you might say, that there was a real value to be had in finding the humor in things.
And one interesting thing at EmilSitka.com is you can actually see your father had drawn a map of the actual route that he had taken, and that's on there as well. And
that map, by the way, is like about 4 feet across. So you don't get that. You don't get that when you see it on the internet there. But it is a map that he drew himself, and he traces his route, puts all the cities. He even mentions details like how many places they would stay at, how many flops that they got, which means a bed to stay, how many people they put the B on, as they called it, which means how many people that they would hit up or beg from. That's what they call it. Put the B on somebody was to beg from them. And he has all these little statistics and details about his trip. And he took that whole episode in his life very seriously, and like I say, retained these mementos. And I just got to share it with the world. So I'm going to publish that thing. And there's even a drawing he made. I don't know if you've seen it there on the internet, but he did a little drawing of himself and his brother on a train, sitting in a boxcar. You can see that he was a little crude, but he was a pretty good artist way back then in those days.
And that's just kind of a slice of some of the things that fans can see and enjoy at EmilSitka.com. And
right. There is an extensive biography there, with a lot of pictures and such. And then there's also, if people get into the film section, you can actually there's a separate page for each and every one of 200 and plus productions my father was in. And in the first 50 of them or so, you'll be able to read, like I say, all these details about, including diary entries and behind-the-scenes materials from them. So it's got a great deal of information. There's information about all the different 35-plus shorts my father was in. So the website's got a wealth of information. I don't know of anybody who's actually gone through and seen it all. I've worked on it for months and months and months, and I do intend to begin working on it again, but I've decided to leave it stand as it is for the next few months while I work on these 2 book projects, meaning the Hobo Journey book and also my father's 4th Stooge Experiences with the Three Stooges book.
Kind of your experiences, with your father, of course, working with the Three Stooges and you being at the age you were, and you had said earlier that it was just kind of commonplace, Dad's on TV, and, it was just normalcy, and you didn't really pay much mind to it. But do you have any recollections of any time you spent with the Stooges themselves?
Well, we didn't really have the Three Stooges themselves coming over to our house, but I did have a few occasions where I met the Three Stooges. There was, in fact, if you look on the website there somewhere, I have a picture of myself in the Three Stooges. See if I can find it. I'm not sure where I've got that picture. It's also on Facebook, though, that picture with the Three Stooges and 2 little boys. Well, I'm the little one in the middle. So I met the Three Stooges when I was about 7 years old, and my father was working with them in the Three Stooges in orbit, and he plays a professor. It was a 2-week job for him, probably the biggest job, film job he'd ever had. And at that time, my father was divorced. My mother and father split, and so we were living with my dad, my brother, and I. And so we had one of my father's lady friends was watching us during the day when it was during the summer when my father was working in the film. So there was one occasion where he asked her to bring us down to the studio to watch them film, and we did that. And we got to watch them film the several scenes, and it was pretty interesting. And then at some point, again, I was about 7 years old, and I'd only ever seen the Three Stooges on TV. It was the first time I'd ever seen all 3 of them live, in person, and they were acting and all that. And they were pretty rough, and I, at least for a little 7-year-old kid, just, the slapping and whatnot. And so I remember at the time they were finished shooting, and my father was saw that we were there in the back and watching them, and he called the Stooges over. He called, "Hey boys, come on over. Let's take a picture with my sons." And at that time, I was almost in a semi-panic because I was thinking, "Oh my God, the Stooges are coming over here, and
they're going to get you."
Yeah, they're going to get me, and they're going to start slapping and bonking me and poking me in the eyes and what. and then they crowded around us, and we were actually still on the set of the Three Stooges, so it's great. There's a grandfather clock in back, the picture in back of us, and so my father stood there with the Three Stooges, and then me and my brother in front of him, and Moe's right behind me, and if you see the picture, you can see it's almost like he's breathing down my neck, and you'll look at my face, I'm not smiling. I was actually pretty afraid of what might happen, with Moe right behind me, but nothing did happen. In fact, they behaved in person more like clowns than anything else. They realized that they were kind of taking on that role with young kids, and so they were very, very gentle and very, very calm and polite and not rough at all with us. But that was one occasion where I actually met the Three Stooges. Another occasion occurred back in 1965, which was later than that, when they were doing those Three Stooges, they were calling the New Three Stooges cartoon series in Newport Beach, and they were filming 20-something episodes of those little live-action things. And so there was at least several occasions where my brother and my sister and I were able to go visit my father down there. And again, we met the Three Stooges together. And this was 65. They were pretty old and not very energetic. So,
slowing down.
They're slowing down. Yeah, there's a picture of of us with them sitting down and off camera, I guess, a few times and whatnot. So we have a few pictures like that. But one of the probably the most interesting experiences I had really wasn't with the Three Stooges, but was with Moe Howard. And this goes back really early to 1960 or so. And I would have been only about 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old, 1959. This was right after the shorts department at Columbia had shut down, which was the main source of my father's employment. And so he was out of a job pretty much because he wasn't getting any work, very little work. And at the same time, my parents split up. And so he found himself with 2 young kids, trying to be a single parent and next to no employment. And so, there was other circumstances going on. I had older brothers and sisters who were living with my mom, and it's a complicated situation. But his situation was that he had these 2 young boys and no job. And so times were tough. And Moe Howard, took sympathy on him. And I remember it was like Christmas, probably 1959, that my father told me and my brother, and of course we're little kids, he said, "Oh yeah, we're going to go down to the supermarket. We're going to meet Moe Howard of the Three Stooges, and we're going to do some shopping." And I guess the situation was that Moe had agreed to meet my father at a grocery store if times were hard, and go through the grocery store and fill up a shopping cart, and Moe was going to pay for it and take care of my dad so he could take care of his kids. And so, very generous thing for Moe to do. I didn't understand it at the time. I was only 4 or 5 years old, and all I could think of is, what are you talking about? We're going to the grocery store with Moe Howard, and we're going to be knocking aisles over, and we're going to be throwing stuff. So you can't go to the grocery store with the Three Stooges. That's crazy. That's all I could think of. I was only 4 years old, so so okay, we're going to go do this. All right, Daddy, let's go. And so he took me and my brother, and we went down, I think it was 3rd and Vermont. There's a big grocery store there, and we met Moe Howard out in the parking lot. So this is weird. I'm thinking we're going to see the Three Stooges here, right? And so we finally find him out in the parking lot, and guess what? It's some old guy, short old guy with a hat on and glasses. And you walk right by him. You'd never know this guy was in movies or had anything. He looked like a pawn shop owner or something like that. An old crabby guy, and so sure enough, he takes off his glasses and his hat, and yeah, it's Moe. He combs his hair down just to show us it's really him, and he puts it back up, puts the glasses back on, and then we go in the grocery store, and he actually kept his glasses and hat on the whole time, so maybe that's part of being a possible celebrity, but nobody recognized him. We sure didn't. And it was like almost incredulous to us little kids that this is Moe. How could it be? But anyway, so we go through the grocery store, and sure enough, my father's picking out staples and bread and canned goods and whatnot to take care of us for a while, whatever Moe would allow him to buy. And, of course, we were little kids, and we'd been to the grocery store, and we'd seen all these weird things that they had there before, and my father never let us buy them. But, we clued in that this was, in somebody else's on tab, so we thought, we can just grab stuff and put them in the cart, too. So we ended up throwing stuff. My brother and I, of course, again, 4 years old and a 6-year-old kid, and I was the 4-year-old. And so we ended up grabbing stuff like chocolate-covered ants, and in the old days, they used to sell snails or escargot, and they would include a package on the side that had all the shells in it, and that fascinated us, all these snail shells attached to a can of escargot. So we threw that in there as well, and so nobody noticed. My father and Mo were, seriously talking, and they're shopping and this and that. And then we finally come to the checkout, and this is the funny part, is where, so they're checking this stuff out, and Mo's all of a sudden looking at inside the cart, and he goes, "What the heck is this stuff?" And I don't think he said heck. He used some salty language. "What the heck?" And he grabs the ridiculous things we put in there. He starts putting them on the shelf right behind there with the bubble gum and all that stuff. And "We're not buying this stuff. We're not buying this. No chocolate-covered ants. What the heck?" But he did pay for the bill, and it was probably at least a couple of $100, and we got a huge shopping cart full of groceries, which didn't help my father get through. And unfortunately, he did get a job shortly after that, not in the movies, but a day job, you might say, and was able to take care of us. But it was a very, very generous thing for Mo Howard to do, and actually it kind of brings up a side to him that most people don't really know about, that he had a very compassionate nature to him as well. It does seem like there was it was sort of a family thing, and I think that Mo himself, he was a quiet and kind of a serious man and played the bully on screen, but he really probably did have a heart of gold, and you just couldn't really tell from the slaps and the bonks.
The interesting story about your father's first appearance with the Stooges in Halfwit's Holiday was his first time meeting Curly. A very, very interesting, and of course Curly at that point, had been sick. But a really interesting sort of different meeting, I guess, for meeting Curly.
Well, that's true, and of course my father was just, that was the 7th film role my father ever had, and he treasured them so much that he would take the time to go up and introduce himself to the other supporting actors and the crew as well, and if he could, the stars of the film, whenever he met somebody new. And so this was his first film with the Three Stooges, and frankly, at the time, he wasn't really that sure about who they were. He'd heard the name before, and all of a sudden he gets a script for the Three Stooges, and there's no name. Normally, when he got a script, it would say, Vera Vegg or Hugh Herbert or Schilling and Lane, but this one just said Three Stooges, and he didn't know who exactly they were. So when he showed up on the set the first time, he's all dressed up as a fancy butler, and he shows up, and I think it was like middle of the day, and he noticed that a number of the crew, some of the crew members that he normally would be chumming with had makeup on. And he's going, how come these crew guys have makeup on? It turns out that they were the Three Stooges, the guys that he was about to work with, because they were dressed up as workmen. In the first scene that he's going to play, he is a butler, fancy butler, and they're workmen, and so he didn't even recognize them. So, in any case, once he was told who they were, he did make an effort to go up to each one of them individually and introduce himself, and so Mo was very, very serious, and Larry pretty much the opposite. Larry took things very lightheartedly. Mo was a scientist when it came to his comedy. And then he found Curly, and Curly was quiet, not talking to anybody, kind of off by himself. And so my father went up there and said, "Hi, I'm Emil Sitka. I'm in this picture." And Curly stood up and said, "Good to meet you, sir," and then sat down. "I'm Curly," and said, "I'm Curly," and sat down. It was very formal-like and very short. And my father was kind of impressed, thinking this guy's the star of the movie. Just call me sir, and I'm nobody. I'm just a supporting actor on here, and maybe it's the tuxedo, but he did feel that it was very, very formal-like, and certainly not anywhere kind of like the Curly character you'd expect. From Curly in the movies, you'd expect that he'd be in the life of the party and joking with everybody and running around, and not the case at all. But like you mentioned, he had already been suffering a series of small strokes by this time, it turns out, and his character his ability to perform had already been marred, and he was not doing very well. And my father even recognized that in his first my father was worked with him for 4 days on that movie, and Curly had the stroke on the last day. But the first 3 days, my father did work with him, and he would come home and write, gosh, the guy seems like he's ailing in some way. Well, I can't tell what, So there must have been something about Curly that even my father, meeting him for the first time, could tell there was something not right about him over the course of those first 3 days of work. And then on the fourth day, Curly was there, and then he was gone. And nobody mentioned to the supporting actors or the crew what had happened. And it's true, though, that on a set, supporting actors and crew, they frequently are subject to rewrites and changes in the script, and nobody tells them. That's the director's business to handle that, and the actors just do what they're told. So he did notice, though, that as they're coming around to the end of the movie, on the day 4, the last day, there's going to be a huge pie fight. And so they're putting canvas tarps all around and preparing for this pie fight, loading up these pies. And for some reason, Curly's not there. And they go to start shooting some of the scenes. And sure enough, they've been rewritten without Curly. Now, my father's script still included Curly, but the directors apparently had been rewritten. And so, they shoot the whole thing, which is Larry and Moe, and a few other actors get involved. And in fact, my father has a great scene in that one where he gets smacked in the kisser with a pie. He's a butler, of course, and he walks up to a lady. He's all clean, looking good, walks up to a lady with a drink and says, "Your drink, madam." Pow! Gets a pie in the face, and he walks off saying, "Pardon me, madam." And he
very dignified.
Your drink, madam. Pardon me, madam.
He's very dignified, and he does it perfectly. Never flinches a bit, and all that stuff. And it's like one of the classic pies in the face of all time, and it's been reused in several different shorts since then. In fact, it's used frequently for introductions to Three Stooges movies and whatnot, or the retrospectives, because it's a great classic pie in the face shot. Well, and my father's gotten a lot of accolades for that. Oddly enough, people have said, "Oh, that was a great scene you did there." And then as I'm looking into the script recently, I realized that that's not even in the script. That scene isn't even written in there, and one can only assume that it was probably filler for, they were making up scenes for the supporting actors to make up for the fact that they weren't going to have Curly in anything. And so, Curly was disappeared, and the cast was never really told what happened to him until later. That they discovered that only Moe, Larry, and Jules White knew what had actually happened, and they didn't tell anybody. And they just wanted to carry on with the picture, get it done. And it was only later that they found out that Curly had been, damaged by the stroke. And probably better off not to tell the cast, because how could they go on and have a big pie fight and have fun doing it with smiles and all this stuff?
Yeah, with that hanging over.
Yeah, with that hanging over the set. So it was probably smart that they didn't tell everybody.
Everybody knows your father, of course, for his work with the Stooges, but your dad did so many other things, including a lot of Andy Clyde pictures. Did your dad have a favorite picture, whether that's a Stooge picture or anything else he had done with Columbia?
Well, I would say probably one of his personal favorites was Billy Gets Her Man, which was with Billy Burke. And Billy Burke was, of course, in The Wizard of Oz in 1939. She played the Good Witch, and she actually had a series of shorts at Columbia as well with Jules White and them. And so my father worked in one of those, and my father enjoyed doing stunts. He wasn't really a trained stunt man, didn't have that kind of background, but he enjoyed doing stunts, or what he would call acting with his body, not just his face and his voice, but acting with his body. So he volunteered for a lot of rough stuff. And so this role, an upcoming Billy Burke film was coming, and this was actually going to be written and directed by Edward Burns, Stooge director. And Ed Burns wrote this role just for my dad, because my father was so willing to take this physical abuse. And so there's a lot of physical abuse in it, where he gets run over, he's in a wheelchair, and he gets knocked out of the wheelchair. He takes a vase in the face, he falls off a bench, and this and that. And so he was very proud of the role that he did, but unfortunately he did get injured during making it. It's the only time he ever was injured while making any films, which is kind of surprising when you think of some of the stuff that happened in those Stooge films. But he actually did get a broken nose and a cracked vertebrae from that one. It's called Billy Gets Her Man. It's very popular. It was a very popular film, and he got a lot of accolades for it. In fact, I remember he said the first time he ever met Joe Besser pointed out, "Hey, you were that actor in Billy Gets Her Man, weren't you?" And so, it is a fact that he did get injured making it, and pretty badly, suffered for several years with that neck vertebrae problem. But that was, in the long run, one of his favorite roles, and one of that we felt very proud of. He did work a lot with Andy Clyde, and maybe a half a dozen different films, and had a great respect for Andy Clyde. Andy Clyde, I don't know if you're aware, but he had the second most number of shorts at Columbia, second only to the Three Stooges. I don't know, I'm not sure how many, but dozens and dozens of them. And he was a very well-regarded, highly esteemed comedian at the time. My father actually modeled himself after Andy Clyde. And Andy Clyde, if you recall, he used to do an old man character all the way from when he was young until he did become an old man. And he did it really well, but a big bushy mustache and little glasses and a funny voice, and was able to develop, make a comedy career out of this old man character. Andy Clyde did. And so my father modeled a number of his old man characters after Andy Clyde. And my father often thought that of all the people that he'd worked with, Andy Clyde would probably be, a more steadfast star. And so nowadays, when, or at least he used to say, my father would say that it's amazing to him that everybody loves the Three Stooges, but nobody's ever heard of people like Andy Clyde.
Right.
Who, way back then. And of course, if you are a film buff, you probably have heard of Andy Clyde, but the average comedian, film goer out there does not know who Andy Clyde was. And yet everybody knows who the Three Stooges are. So, big difference. And but also my father worked with Harry Von Zell in 8 different shorts, who was a radio star. He had a great admiration for Leon Errol, who he worked with, but not at Columbia. Leon Errol did work at Columbia, but he went over to RKO, if I remember correctly, and my father worked with him a few times, and had a great admiration for Leon Errol, thought that he was a comic genius. So, but there's a whole roster of names my father worked with, Milton Berle and Lucille Ball, and, the list goes on and on. And there's a big list, in fact, on AmelSitka.com if you want to see all those people's names and the films that they were in with my dad.
Your father was kind of an ambassador for the Three Stooges. You talked about how you became kind of the ambassador after your father had passed away. Do you still find that, and what kind of experience has that been for you now to kind of be a new ambassador for your father's work and, of course, for his work with the Stooges?
Yeah, well, and I would say probably going back 15 years ago when my father passed away, I was not looking for that kind of role. I was, I had just lost my dad, with whom I was very close, and so I wanted to familiarize myself somewhat with his world, and so I contacted these fans, or remained in contact with them, and up until then I really hadn't been, but since then I've found that I went to a convention, and I was saw people, met people that I'd been in contact with only as pen pals, and gone to the Three Stooges convention several times back east, gone to several of them out here. There's an annual Three Stooges Film Festival over in Glendale, not far from where I'm at over here. And I've sort of developed like a second family myself. And I've often thought it was like my father had a second family that those of us in his real family weren't really aware of, and that was this huge group of fans and friends that he had. And so now I've kind of got that. I've got my own real friends and family and whatnot, but I also have a Stooge family of friends. And so when I go to when a Stooge festival, I'll see people I hadn't seen in months or maybe a couple of years, but I recognize them, and so I've become sort of absorbed into the Stooge community, you might say, and I'm having a lot of fun with it, and I'm going to try to make the most out of it this year by finally coming up with that Three Stooges book. But yeah, I feel like I've been welcomed with open arms by the Stooge community, as such as it is, mainly because I've got a ticket, which is who my father was.
Right.
I have to admit, when I first started appearing at these kind of events, I was surprised that people took it seriously. The first time somebody actually asked me for an autograph, I thought they were joking. I thought, right, why do you want my autograph? I didn't do anything, But I could see that the fellow who was asking for it was serious about it. He was sincere and was maybe a little disappointed in my reaction. So I thought, you know what, I gotta approach this a little differently. These people take this seriously, and so I've come to realize that, even though I, personally, honestly, I don't have any, I can't take any credit for my father's career and whatnot. I have come to recognize, though, that I'm probably as close as some people may ever get to somebody who actually met the Stooges and who had some involvement, or whose family had some involvement with the Stooges. And so that's a responsibility. And so I've signed, probably, I hate to say it, but probably a couple thousand autographs in the last 15 years, as if I am somebody, as if I did something. But I do it in, out of respect for the fans and their appreciation for the Stooges and their legacy, and for my dad, and for his memory, in honor of his memory. And that's probably what does keep me going, is there is a lot of people who are still interested and still desire to know more and still want to appreciate, and a lot of people just want to, there's people that just want to tell somebody how much they appreciated that my father's work, and of course I'm the person that's available to receive that affection, and so it's really kind of a marvelous situation for me to be in. Although I feel like my father's the one that earned all this credit, but it is great that there's so much interest in it, and that's what's feeding me and keeping me going. As long as there is, I'm going to continue to do it.
And, of course, AmelSitka.com. Also reach that through thefourthstooge.com. And we will all be waiting anxiously for more news and more information on your progress with your dad's memoirs and the book. That's really exciting. I know that was one thing when I first started to gather up some information for the interview that I noticed was that there wasn't a definitive Amel Sitka book out, and it's very exciting to hear that you're working on that diligently now.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope to be able to give you, I don't know if we'll do a Stoogecast podcast again, but I hope to be able to update you with good information in the next couple of months and how the projects are coming along.
AmelSitka.com, thefourthstooge.com. It's Saxon Emil Sitka. I really, really appreciate you again taking the time out to be on our first episode of the Stoogecast, and I look forward to the book, of course, and I look forward to us doing this again soon.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Corey, and I wish you the best of luck with the Stoogecast. It's something that is sort of overdue, and I bet you get a lot of interest in it.
And a big, big thanks to Saxon Amel Sitka for being our guest. Some tremendous stories, and of course the revelation that he is compiling his father's work and journal entries and memoirs for release this year. Tremendous stuff. And like I told Saxon, while I was doing some research for the interview, I noticed that there was no actual book about Amel Sitka. Of course, there's the Vernon Dent book and a few others, and of course on the Stooges themselves, but no Amel Sitka book. So it's very wonderful to know that Saxon is going to be compiling all of that into a book for all of us Stooge fans this year in 2014. And of course, we would be honored to have Saxon come back on the show, talk a little more about his father's career, talk about the book, talk about just some of the things that he's learned from going through all of his dad's memoirs. And I certainly hope that some of those scripts that he was talking about when Amel was tapped to be Larry's replacement, I hope some of those get printed in the book. That would be some phenomenal stuff to read. So a big thank you, Saxon Emil Sitka. And of course, visit AmelSitka.com. thefourthstooge.com will get you there as well. And it was tremendous. Just wonderful to have Saxon on the show. And hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Now, a couple of new releases that have come out recently through Mill Creek Entertainment. It's a Three Stooges 2-disc set, of course, featuring Rockin' in the Rockies, Three Stooges Meet Hercules, Three Stooges Go Around the World in a Daze, Have Rocket Will Travel, The Outlaws is Coming, and Time Out for Rhythm. all included on that set. You can get it through Amazon.com. It's just a fantastic set to have all those, and the prints look great on there as well. So check that out. And the Vitaphone Comedy Collection, Volume 2, Shemp Howard, 1933 to 1937, is going to be released on the 18th. So this Tuesday, that'll be out, the 18th of February. My Mummy's Arms, Daredevil O'Dare, Smoked Hams, Dizzy and Daffy, A Peach of a Pear, a bunch of great stuff on there. So check that one out. Get that one pre-ordered on Amazon as well. Vitaphone Comedy Collection, Volume 2. Some great Shemp Howard stuff from his Vitaphone years. And, of course, a few more plugs. Of course, AmelSitka.com. And also, check out Jim Pauly's book, Three Stooges Hollywood Filming Locations. Fantastic, beautiful coffee table book. The Stoogeum, Gary Lassen, the Three Stooges Journal, and the Three Stooges Fan Club as well. You can also visit thegrandstooges.com. If you get a chance, visit that website, and we are actively working on guests for all future episodes. We have many people we've been talking to. Nobody set in stone for the interview yet, but I guarantee you guys are definitely going to want to stick around and check out the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/thestoogecast. And all the information will be posted on there. And, of course, we will see you next month. And until then, a nyuk-nyuk and a woo-woo to you, yours. And thank you guys so much for tuning in to the first episode of the Stoogecast, the first of many episodes of the Stoogecast right here on the Fearcast Network. I'm your host, Corey Udler, and I want to thank once again Saxon Emil Sitka for sharing such great stories with us here on our first episode of the Stoogecast. Until next time.
What's the matter with you? I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.